Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. So today we are at day 13 of our complete DevOps course. So for the people who haven't watched our previous videos, just to let you know, we are doing 45 days of DevOps course. And in the previous videos, we covered various good concepts like Linux, shell scripting, deploying a live project on AWS EC2 instance. We talked about fundamentals, SDLC, lot of good things. So I'll try to put the link in the description of the playlist which has day 0 to day 12. So if you haven't watched, please check the previous videos. Perfect. Now coming to the topic for today, this is a very important concept that you have to learn AWS services for DevOps. The reason is that AWS being one of the top cloud providers, it offers more than 200 services, right? So what is AWS and what are the cloud services? Just 30 seconds of explanation. AWS is a cloud provider. Basically, it falls into the category of IaaS as well as PaaS. So it provides you a platform as service as well as infrastructure as service as well. uh, the main concept or the main idea of AWS is that it makes your life easy by providing your products or your applications in a service model. So for a basic example, everybody might know about or heard about Kubernetes. So Kubernetes installation, deployment, management, everything is a overhead or a burden, right? So AWS, what they have done is they created Kubernetes as a service. So by which, you can directly go to your AWS platform, click a button, and you'll get a Kubernetes service. So who maintains everything? Like, you just have to scale up, scale down, but everything underneath is taken care by AWS. So this is the service model. Even these days, everything, everybody are moving towards the SaaS model, software as a service. So AWS on their platform provides a lot of softwares as service model, right? So this is a fundamental concept of AWS, and today they have close to 200 services, or at the time of doing this video, I think they have 210 or something. I don't remember the exact number. So out of this 210 services, everybody has a common question that, okay, so now 200 services on AWS, as a DevOps engineer, should I worry about all of those services? Because it is practically impossible for a single person to gain knowledge on all of these services, right? So even if you ask me, I might not know all of these 200 services because I did not work on all of the 200 services. For example, AWS have a lot of machine learning services, right? As a DevOps engineer, you might not uh, like, unless you're working on a machine learning project, you might not need to know the concepts of machine learning as a DevOps engineer, or you don't have to create ML services. So what we are going to learn today is what are the AWS DevOps related services, or what are the services that a DevOps engineer has to worry about or concentrate, okay, on AWS platform. Does that make clear? So if you have any questions at this point of time, you can put the questions in the comment section, so that I can take those questions after the video. I mean, I can check your I can check the comment section and I can reply to you. Perfect. So now, in the previous videos, we already learned that DevOps is always about automation, right? And improving the efficiency. So the same thing falls into the category of AWS as well, right? So in every video, I keep talking about these two things, automation and efficiency. Why do I keep talking about these things? Because as a DevOps engineer, it's one of your key roles and responsibilities to concentrate about automation and efficiency. So apart from the services that AWS is providing, okay, we'll definitely talk about the AWS services that DevOps engineer require. But the second aspect of the video that we are also going to cover is how you can improve the efficiency and how you can automate stuff on AWS. So these are the two topics that we are going to touch. So firstly, let me start with the AWS services for DevOps engineers. Perfect. So in our previous videos, we already talked about EC2, right? So EC2 is something that I think most of you by now have got a clear picture of. Okay, so we also did a live project on AWS EC2 instance. We deployed one web application. We also deployed a dynamic application onto AWS and showed you how to get things working, like how to expose this application to external world. So one of the key concepts that everybody should understand is EC2, right? And the second thing, that you need to. So I'm trying to list out all the services that are required by DevOps engineers, or you should definitely know as DevOps engineers. Okay, so once you understand the concept of EC2, you should also understand the concept of VPC. Okay, what is virtual private cloud? Why is this required? Because everything is secure, everything has to be secure. So by keeping private, what do I mean by here? Secure. So securing your EC2 instances is one of the key aspects, or securing your AWS resources. So that's why you need to have very clear understanding of VPC. So there are various components that are involved in VPC, right? So you have like the security groups, you have CIDR blocks, that is subnet ranges, you have inbound and outbound traffic rules. So all of these things are something that you should definitely understand. No, don't worry. I will definitely cover these things in the intermediate level of DevOps. Sorry, intermediate level of AWS. So if you have watched the day zero where we explained about our complete DevOps syllabus, I told you that firstly I'll start with AWS basics, then I'll take a shift because I want to give you some time. Teaching AWS entirely in one single flow makes you confused. So that's why I only talked about basic AWS things that are like deploy applications onto EC2, S3 buckets and stuff like that. But don't worry, we'll also cover about VPC, we'll talk about security groups, we'll talk about subnets, we'll talk about inbound, outbound traffic rules, configuring a load balancer, all of these things we'll do with a live project. Don't worry about it. Okay, now the point 3, or the service number 3 that you should know definitely is, any guesses? Yeah, so there are a lot of AWS services. I know at this point of time it's not easy to guess, but you should also have some good understanding of EBS, or volume or storage related services. So volumes. So there are similar things that fall into the category, like you have EBS, you have EFS, all of these things, like the file storage and the block storage related services. But fundamentally you should understand EBS, because you should always know how to deploy a volume to your application, or how to attach a volume to your EC2 instances, because your EC2 instances by default come with a default storage or default volumes. Now when you are running your applications in live scenarios, what happens is, sometimes let's say you are deploying a database, or you are deploying your application that keeps on creating some files. So it is better to store the information into volume mounts, and you can, like, detach them, take some snapshots, take backups, and reattach them whenever it is required. So it's a common practice even people do on their physical or on-premises infrastructure. So similarly, you should know the same things on AWS. That is, on AWS, it takes through EBS volumes. Perfect. So this is something that you should know. Then you should have good understanding of your S3 buckets or your storage related services. Now, if you want to take a look at live scenarios, there are hundreds of scenarios where these storage services are used. A basic example is, let's say there is an application. It reads content from external sources, like let's say application reads sources content from Excel sheets, or application is reading content from some files. Now, where do you store these files and Excel sheets? Or your application is writing humongous data. So this humongous data has to be kept in some place, right? It has to be stored in some place. This is day in day out of every application. Definitely, like, it might be omitting some JSON related data, YAML related information, files that your customer wants to refer to. So better you store in a cheap service, or find out a cheapest service that AWS identifies, so that whenever you want, you can store, so that you can take some you can do some compromise, or you can take some liberty of storing excess information. So by storing excess information, you need a storage service that is offered very cheap, and that is, like, extendable. So that's the reason why everybody go for S3 buckets, or S3 is one of the storage services that is widely used on AWS. And recently AWS has also made S3 encrypted by default. That means whenever you are storing some data in S3, previously it is up to the DevOps engineers, or it is up to the management or AWS admins to enable the encryption on S3 buckets or not. But now by default S3 is encrypted. Okay, so data, when it is stored in S3, so there is an encryption that AWS has defined as mandatory. Okay, so I'm not going into the details of S3. We have a lot of things like versioning. You have stuff like encryption. Then you can store or configure some IAM rules. So okay, let's not go into it, but you should have good understanding of S3 buckets. Now, fifth one, and this is very important for. So this does not have any order of hierarchy or any order of priority. So it doesn't mean that I wrote EC2 first. So I mean to say that EC2 is the first and foremost service you have to learn on AWS. No, it's not like that. I'm just writing as I remember. Now, the fifth one, or the one of the important ones that I would consider is IAM. Many people start with IAM. So I have also made video on IAM on our on our channel. So if you want to check our video on IAM, you can also do that. IAM is nothing but identity and access management. Okay, so identity and access management is a critical and key component. Everything that you are using, or every tool, or every application that you are using, even Jenkins, or even any deployment related application, what is the first and foremost thing that you would do? You would configure the permissions for your users, right? For example, you're using GitHub. You will not grant complete access to everybody in your project, right? What you will usually do, like, okay, if you are a developer, you have right access. If you are a manager, or if you are someone, the QA engineer or something, you would only have read access to your GitHub repository. Because somebody, let's say there is a QA engineer, or a quality assurance engineer, or a tester. So this person should not have right access. I mean, in general talks, okay. So it depends upon organization to organization, but just as an example, let's say there is a development repo. You might not want to grant QA engineers access to the repo, because unfortunately there might be some things that this person might be committing to the repository. Or you don't want to grant anybody admin access apart from the maintainers, because if somebody has admin access, they can go ahead and delete the repo unfortunately or unexpectedly. So to avoid these things, for each and every tool, there is security that should be configured. In AWS, this kind of service, or the service that takes care of identity and access management, is AWS IAM. Okay, so AWS IAM is responsible for your developers, or for your QA engineers, to log into your AWS, and as a DevOps engineer, you configure some policy rules for them, saying that okay, this developer has only have access to EC2 instances, or this developer has only read access to S3 buckets, or this developer has only read access to EBS volumes. So these kind of things you configure using IAM, that is identity and access management. Perfect. So this is one of the key services that you have to learn. And then again, the other important thing that I would consider here is CloudWatch. So CloudWatch is another AWS service that you should have idea. The reason is CloudWatch takes care of monitoring on your AWS. Okay. So CloudWatch takes care of monitoring. Why is monitoring important? I don't think I have to even explain this, but monitoring is monitoring and observability. Okay. So wherever you go in the world of DevOps and in the world of site reliability engineering, monitoring and observability is taken as a key thing for everything that you want to build. Like, you want to build a reliable application, you want to build a sustainable application, or you want to build a highly available application. So for everything, monitoring is key component. And when you come to AWS, CloudWatch plays a critical role, because it has log, or it has access to every action that is taking place on your AWS. Let's say there is a developer who has created a S3 bucket. Okay, so, or there is a developer who has created a EBS volume. Okay, so you can get the information of this using CloudWatch, or you want to trigger some action whenever a developer creates a EBS volume without encryption. Okay, so he creates a unencrypted EBS volume, let's say, and as a DevOps engineer, you want to take action and say that okay, send a mail notification asking the developer what is the reason why you have created unencrypted EBS volume. Our organization by default, as per the compliance, only advises you to create encrypted volumes. Okay, so as a DevOps engineer, you are guardrails. By guardrails mean to say you are the security guards. Okay, so you ensure that your AWS is not only automated and efficient, but you also make sure that anybody is not misusing your AWS, or anybody is not using AWS against your compliance. Okay, so let's say your organization has a complaint saying that anybody who creates EBS volumes and storing some information in this EBS volumes should have this EBS volumes encrypted by default. But what one of the developer has done is he created EBS volume unencryptedly. Okay, so he did not attach any encryption rules for this EBS volume. So what you can do is, with the combination of CloudWatch and the 7 service that I'm talking here, Lambda, you know, you can send a mail notification saying that, okay, in the CloudWatch logs or in the CloudWatch event logging, I understood that you created EBS volume, and when I checked for the EBS volume, I noticed that your EBS volume is unencrypted. So you can send out a mail notification asking the reason why you have created a EBS volume that is unencrypted. So here comes our rule number 7, that is Lambda. Okay, so what is Lambda doing here? The reason why I Lambda put after CloudWatch is because I'm trying to correlate them and telling you like how you can use Lambda and CloudWatch together. Okay, so using Lambda, you can do the second part of it, like sending mail notifications, or by default you can encrypt this EBS even without asking the developer. You can okay, whenever you find that there is an unencrypted EBS volume that is created, you can attach encryption by default. So Lambda is nothing but it's a serverless compute. Okay, so what do I mean by serverless? Many people have this question. Okay, so many people ask me what is the difference between Lambda and CloudWatch. Sorry, Lambda and EC2 instance. Okay, before going that, I hope the concept of CloudWatch was clear to everyone. So CloudWatch is a monitoring service or observability related service on AWS, which will constantly monitoring every action that is taking place on your AWS. Okay, so you can even configure for some rules saying that, okay, whenever my EC2 instance is reaching a threshold amount of CPU or threshold amount of memory, send me a notification. Okay, you can do this kind of things using CloudWatch. Now, coming to Lambda, like I told, it's a serverless compute. Now, what is the difference between Lambda and EC2? If I am saying that using Lambda, I can execute some action and I'm calling it serverless, whereas EC2 is by default a compute service which has a server. What is the difference? So the difference here is that AWS Lambda functions, they can be created and teared down automatically. Like you don't have to do anything from your end. Like for example, you go ahead and create a EC2 instance from the AWS console. But whenever you want to use AWS Lambda, you can directly run the program, or you can execute your Lambda function, and AWS will automatically, okay, even without your request, like it will not ask you, do you want a Ubuntu underneath, or do you want for example, do you want a Red Hat, or you want CentOS? What AWS will do is it will take your action, it will take your code, automatically it will create an instance for you, it will execute the code on the instance, and once the execution is done, it will tear down the instance. Okay, so Lambda are serverless computes which are used for short actions. Okay, unless your EC2 instance, in your EC2 instance, what you'll do, you'll deploy your application, whereas Lambda are used for executing these short actions or these short functionalities that can be teared down and executed and teared down automatically. Perfect. So if you want me to give one example of Lambda function, so probably the example that I stated above, whenever you notice that there is a developer who created unencrypted EBS volume, you can run a Lambda function which will encrypt the EBS volume, and your function gets executed and stopped automatically. So for this reason, you don't have to create EC2 instance all the time, right? So let's say 100 developers are creating EBS instances at once. So it is waste of time to create 100 EC2 instances, run the code and all of these things. Instead, you can run them as Lambda functions. Perfect. So these are the 7 services. Now, after that, what are the things? Just let me repeat this. The first one that we talked about is EC2. Then we talked about VPC. Then we talked about EBS. Then we talked about S3. Then we talked about IAM, CloudWatch, Lambda functions. Then there are other important services also. Let's talk about them. Perfect. So I hope things are clear now, till now. If you have any questions till this 7 services that we covered, again, please let me know in the comment section. I'll definitely answer your questions. Okay, so point number 8. Till now we talked about a certain set of services. Now, the next thing that would be involved is cloud build services. Okay, so what do I mean by cloud build services? For example, you might be performing your CI/CD, or you might be performing your how do I say, like your build and deployment related functionalities on your on-premises using Jenkins or any other things like Travis CI or GitHub Actions or something. But you should also know that AWS provides some build services which can do your how do I say, like build and deployment or continuous integration and continuous delivery. So some of these services are okay. So it is very important for you to know that AWS provides these services, that are AWS code pipeline. Okay, then AWS code build. What are these three services? Okay, so continuous integration and continuous delivery, I don't even have to explain that it is one of the key responsibilities of DevOps engineer. It is not even possible that you are a DevOps engineer and you don't know continuous integration and continuous delivery. You should definitely have that idea. So for AWS, okay, if you are doing continuous integration and delivery on Jenkins, you do it in a certain way, but AWS supports this continuous integration and continuous delivery using these three services. Okay, so what are these services? Okay, so firstly, code pipeline. Okay, so code pipeline is like your Jenkins pipeline that you write. Okay, so basically using your code pipeline, what do you do in your Jenkins pipeline? You write this code, right? For example, what is your node, what is the actions that you want to perform, what are the maven targets. So these are the things that you similarly, these are the things that you put in your code pipeline. And then there is a code build service. Okay, so what this code build service does is, it is a fully managed build service that takes care of compiling your code, okay, run some tests and provide some software packages. So these are the things that your code builders. Whereas coming to your code deploy, so code deploy takes care of deploying your code, or deploying your applications onto EC2 instances or on-premises servers. Okay, so let's take an example. For example, you have your application. Let's say it's a legacy application or it's a microservice. It is not containerized yet. It is being deployed on your EC2 instances for now. So there has to be a set easy way by which, once your artifacts are built, okay, once your continuous integration is done, and let's say you have your artifact, it can be a jar file, war file, or something. Let's say there is a war file that is created by your continuous integration, and you want to deploy this war file onto a EC2 instance. Okay, so that whoever is the user is getting the latest version of your EC2, of your application on EC2 instance. So for it to automatically happen, you can use your AWS code deploy. And code build, like I mentioned you, it takes care of your build related service. Okay, whatever your compiling of your code is there, running of your code, and all of these things. And code pipeline is like your very similar to your Jenkins pipeline. So these are the things, and these are the tools using which AWS CI/CD takes place. So if you are on AWS completely, or if your organization is on AWS completely, so you have to reevaluate why you are using Jenkins. Is it because you have Jenkins from old times, or have you been using Jenkins for a long time now and it is difficult to migrate to AWS code related, build related services? If that is the case, then you have to rethink. Okay, because I'm completely on AWS now, do I want to move completely to these things, or in future I might move from AWS to Azure? If you are in that certain state, definitely you should not use these services, because they are very much restricted only to AWS, right? So if you are only restricted to one specific cloud platform, then use the CI/CD or the build services that specific cloud platform is providing. Even Azure provides their CI/CD services. That is, you can use Azure DevOps, and even AWS provides their own CI/CD services. That are the things that I mentioned. But if you are on multi-cloud, or in future you might move from one cloud platform to the other cloud platform, it is not recommended to use these build services. Now, number 9. Okay, so I hope the build related things are very clear to you. What are the CI/CD services, and what is the significance of using these CI/CD services? After this, okay, so it is very important for a DevOps engineer to monitor their cloud configuration. Okay, so AWS provides by default AWS configuration service. So what it does is it's one of the guardrail services that AWS is providing. Okay, so in the AWS configuration service, you can basically go ahead and look what are the configurations you have created. Like the basic example that I previously stated, somebody is creating a unencrypted EBS volume, or somebody is creating a S3 bucket without versioning. So you can configure all of these things in your configuration, AWS configuration, and you can perform some remedy actions, or you can perform some guardrail related actions. Okay, after that, one of the other important concepts that DevOps engineers should know. Okay, let's say you are completely on AWS, and you want to take a look at the billing or the costing that is that your organization is spending. You need to have idea on billing and costing, right? So AWS by default has a billing service, and in the billing service you get to know everything, like where your organization is spending money. Let's say your organization is spending more money on EC2 or S3 buckets or EBS. Okay, if you want to get this information, how much your organization is spending on S3, or how much your organization has spent in last 30 days, last 90 days. So for this kind of reasons, you should have very good idea of billing and costing related services. Okay, so again, just to repeat, we talked about the cloud build services, that is the CI/CD services on AWS. We talked about the AWS configuration. We talked about billing and costing service. After this, okay, there are some again important services. We will shift to a different area here. So AWS has something called as AWS KMS. Okay, so again, one of the important things is to keep your data secure always. Okay, so let's say you have secrets, or let's say you have some configuration related files. Okay, it is always important to keep them secure, right? For example, you want to enable encryption on your S3 buckets. You want to enable uh, encryption on your EBS volumes. So you need to have some secrets, right? How do you encrypt? Whenever I'm saying that you have to encrypt S3 bucket, that means to say that whoever is trying to access this S3 bucket, they need to have some access to a key, or they need to have access to some secure thing. So you can use AWS KMS for this kind of actions, right? So is it clear what AWS KMS is doing? Many people might not have used AWS KMS, because if you are doing your projects by your own, or if you're doing some demo projects, you might not have used KMS. But in your real time, KMS is one of a commonly used service. It's a key management service in general. Okay, what does KMS stands for? KMS stands for key management service. That means if you have some secrets, you have some certificates that you want to rotate, or certificates that you want to manage. Okay, so in such cases, you can store these certificates, or you can store this kind of sensitive information in AWS KMS. And using KMS, you can do things sort of service integration. You can do sort of certificate rotation and these kind of things. Okay, after that, you have, okay, I missed one thing in the previous examples. Whenever I was talking about CloudWatch, I should have told you this. So AWS also has something called as CloudTrail. Okay, so the thing is CloudTrail and CloudWatch. Okay, so what CloudTrail does is CloudTrail is used to enable your operational and risk auditing. Okay, what do I mean by that? So in AWS, there are some fundamental things AWS admin or AWS DevOps engineer should definitely know. That is, uh, definitely you have to know about the auditing, you have to know about the governance, you have to know about compliance. So compliance, I already told you, your organization has some compliance or security related things. That is, for example, in our organization, let's say it is mandatory to have EBS as encrypted. So that falls into compliance. Similarly, you have some governing rules and you have some risk auditing. So CloudTrail basically stores the information of this API logs. Okay, so let's say you want to get information of what has happened uh, 30 days ago. You want to get information of all of these things. So basically, you can get these logs from CloudTrail. Okay, I hope it is clear. In if I have to explain in one simple line, CloudTrail is a service. You understand it as something that records your API activities. Okay, and it preserves logs for a specific duration. Like using CloudTrail, you can get logs for last 30 days, last 6 months. So this is why CloudTrail is used. Perfect. After that, These days, containers are definitely in boom. Everybody is using containers these days, right? So for that reasons, even for the DevOps engineer, whoever using on-premise or whoever are working even outside AWS, definitely Kubernetes is something that you should definitely know. So when you come to AWS, AWS offers a managed Kubernetes service, that is AWS EKS. Okay, so Elastic Kubernetes Service. So EKS is something that you should know 100%. That means for sure you should learn about AWS EKS. So if you have good knowledge of Kubernetes on premises, I mean I can definitely tell you that EKS will only have very less things to learn, because in at the end of the day, it's only a Kubernetes service that is managed or provided by AWS. Okay, so it's a managed Kubernetes service provided by AWS. So if you know the fundamentals, or if you know the concept of Kubernetes, whether it is EKS, whether it is AKS, or whether it is Google Kubernetes Engine, everything is the same. But fundamentally you should have 100% understanding, or at least good understanding of what is Kubernetes, why is it used. Then you can start with EKS, and definitely you can learn it in a couple of days if you know Kubernetes. Okay, then it also has some container services, like AWS offers Fargate. So this is without Kubernetes, right? So you can use Fargate without Kubernetes, and it also has something called as ECS, that is Container Service. So Elastic Container Service, you can kind of compare it with Kubernetes, because it's again a container orchestration solution, but it is not based on Kubernetes. What is the difference between EKS and ECS? Okay, so one interview question here. People ask you, what is the difference between EKS versus ECS? So both of them are container orchestration solutions, but ECS is a AWS proprietary solution. AWS has built this solution by their own. It is called as Elastic Container Service. It's a container orchestration solution similar to Kubernetes, but the difference is that ECS is a AWS proprietary service, whereas EKS is a managed Kubernetes service. So AWS has taken Kubernetes and it is providing Kubernetes as a managed service. Does that make sense? Perfect. So if you have any question on EKS versus ECS, do let me know in the comment section. Okay, so we talked about the container related service as well. And then you should have some good understanding on ELK stack, that is Elasticsearch stack. So it is basically Elasticsearch, Logstash, Kibana. But even if you have good understanding on Elasticsearch and how does Elasticsearch works, then it is good. Okay, because why Elasticsearch is important these days, we are dealing with microservices, and each of the microservice omits a lot of logging. So it is good that you collect all of this logging information somewhere, and you perform some queries, or you perform some actions to retrieve which application is throwing error, what are the common error practices that you are seeing in your applications, right? Because let's say you have 1,000 microservices, and you have to get the information of last 100 days. Let's say you want to see in the last 100 days, what is a common error that your applications are sending out. Okay, to monitor this kind of information, you need some efficient logging mechanism. That is one of the efficient logging search mechanism that is available is Elasticsearch. Okay, so usually ELK stack is quite popular. Okay, but people also use different things like Splunk or the other things. So if you want to use Elasticsearch, one of the better combinations is to use Logstash and Kibana. Perfect. Now, these are the 15 services that I've covered. And apart from this, definitely these 15 services are something that you should have good understanding. But apart from this, it depends upon your project to project. Let's say in my project, for example, in my project, let's say I'm using ML, machine learning. So you should definitely, once you join the project, you should have some you should get some good hands-on on the machine learning services. For example, your organization is using TensorFlow. Okay, so as a DevOps engineer, you might not know what TensorFlow is, but depending upon your project, once you join the project, you might have to learn about these things. But in interviews, most of the times, these are the AWS services that interviewers cover. Okay, so just to repeat, we talked about EC2, we talked about VPC, we talked about EBS, S3 buckets, IAM, CloudWatch, Lambda functions. And then we talked about the AWS Cloud Build services, AWS configuration, billing and costing related services, right? We talked about AWS KMS, CloudTrail, EKS, that is Kubernetes related service. We talked about the container solutions, and finally we talked about ELK, that is Elasticsearch, or logging related services. So I hope I covered most of the things. And if you feel that apart from these services, there are some important services that I missed, or as a DevOps engineer, you should learn more than this, do let me know in the comment section. I'll be more than happy to understand from you or get your feedback. And as you know, I reply to each and every comment, and definitely share your feedback so that I can improve in my next videos. So as usual, if you like the video, click on the like button. If you have any feedback for me, put that in the comment section. And if there is someone who is interested to learn DevOps, please share our channel with them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't subscribed to our channel. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next video. Take care, everyone. Bye.